On this episode of Opolis Public Radio, we dig into how freelancers are paid, the problem that this poses for the future of finance and the future of employment. And we're going to talk about decentralized finance in general. We're going to get a big update from one of our advisors and big supporters of the Opolis ecosystem, Vignesh from Lendroid. So welcome to episode 8 of Opolis Public Radio. I am joined in person with Vignesh. Vignesh, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Vignesh, and I've been in the space since 2013. I built a company that made Bitcoin ATMs back in 2013. It's BitAccess, and we went through YCombinator, all that stuff. This is pre-Ethereum, right? So after that, once Ethereum got launched, I got into Ethereum. We've done a few iterations of research on decentralized finance in general, but we focus on creating an anti-fragile financial system as a whole. So it's a long process, and we've been at this project since 2017, and we've missed, I think, just one East Denver in the middle.
Yeah, no, I remember you guys were noticeably absent in 2019, but came back with a big splash in 2020. We were glad to have you back.
Sure.
It was a good time. We had a little bit of fun with some tequila at one of the happy hours, and we had a good time. So it's good to see you again, man. Like, I mean, with everything that's been going on with the pandemic, like, seeing our friends in the space hasn't happened as much, in person, of course. So it's great to have you on the show, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Any kind of socialization helps right now. Thanks a lot for having me.
And thank you for bringing Satoshi over your shoulder there to us. I think that's
that's one of the art I bought at East Denver.
That's right. I remember that now.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, let's jump into it. So Lendroid has been around for a while, and I remember talking to you guys at the first ETH Denver and really understanding this decentralized lending. I mean, you guys were really at the very, very beginning of this because nobody had really been talking about it yet. I mean, this is 2018, and give us some updates on just Lendroid as a project, your products, like where things are at, and just the whole landscape generally for Lendroid.
Sure. I think we launched the first white paper around in August of 2017. So that's been 3 years now, and we also had a prototype back then with ENS name as the collateral, and you could take a loan out. This is still in 2017. So that all started happening, and the space was just getting started. The name DeFi did not exist back then, right? So it was just just lending back then. And I think with our first version, we tried a few things out in terms of the model of how we can do this, and I think that's kind of the model that's going on in the whole space right now, which we call the Wrangler model, where there is a collateral, all loans are over collateralized. And if there is a price volatility situation that affects the lender, the collateral is going to be liquidated some way, right? It's not a foolproof system. A lot of bad things have happened already, black swan, or something that's not so much of a black swan in crypto. So, we've had projects lose money, etc., etc. Now, when we started the project, we were the first to put out that model, but then we moved away from that model because during our testing, we figured out that this has a lot of risk a lot of tail risk, especially. So at ETH Denver, we rolled out a new idea of how we could do lending without actually having this risk not being transferred properly. So we created a whole anti-fragile system, and that's what we have been testing for a while now. And we also we are excited that we also moved into the NFT space, and we've been working on it, testing some prototypes on how we could use lending there, because we also get to work with artists who are real people who are actually making money. I was so excited to see some people, like, because you don't know, like, we talk about DeFi all the time. I don't know who's using it, right? Like,
yeah, no, it's just crypto nerds and high frequency arbitrage traders, right? Like,
because I'm like, is anyone taking a loan at 10% going and buying a house, or some more Ethereum, right? So mostly it's going to be like people are going to leverage and things like that. So we found artists to be a very good customer base and people who we can test our new financial concepts on, and they're also very open to experiment. So we've been like launching a lot of small experiments on that side also.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it seems like, as much as DeFi, the word became a thing, it seems like in 2019, because we were, I think ETH Denver was one of the first events to really have a DeFi track, right? Like, to really emphasize sort of what was going on. But it seems like we're still in highly experimentative mode, right? Like we haven't really, I mean, as much as we've seen a few projects start to scale, we haven't really seen, the vulnerabilities have been accentuated. Like the risks have been accentuated. The Black Thursday for Maker was a big one. Like there's been a lot of vulnerabilities exposed, I guess, through the process that makes me feel like we're still a little bit off from being sort of mainstream ready.
Yeah.
Now, one thing
and that's the thing, right? Like we've been trying out all of these lending models that you see right now.
Yeah.
All kind of follow the same principle behind it, right? Like how do we do lending, and that's the same principle.
Collateralized lending.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what we have to reimagine, and that's what exactly we are doing here from Lendroid.
Yeah. So one thing that we talked about at one point that really piqued my curiosity, because it was something that was, I think, maybe kind of obvious to me, but you had kind of really perked up on it. You're like, wow, like we really need to get out and have more types of collateral, right? Where it's not just one digital asset underpinning another digital asset. And like, that's really what DeFi does now, right? It's mostly, magic internet money on top of magic internet money on top of magic internet money. And we've sort of created, in some people's world, sort of a house of cards, right? But, in sort of reimagining DeFi, even though it might be a little early to say that we need to reimagine it, but thinking about the next evolution of it, you mentioned artists, and we've talked about invoicing, right? So invoices as an asset. And this is obviously our, sort of overlap in sort of the world of DeFi and sort of the future of this. But talk to me a little bit about what your vision for that would be. So like, taking an invoice as an asset, like something that it's a proof of work essentially.
Yeah.
And we're going to pump that into the DeFi market. So explain to our listeners, like this idea that we've got and how we might go about executing that.
Sure. I've spent some time thinking about various models we can do this on, right? And the first thing we come up with is the traditional one. Like I still remember the company called KickPay, which was part of our YC cohort, and they used to do invoice buying, straight plain invoice buying, where if you're going to get paid in say net 30 or net 60, they would just buy up your invoice.
They buy the invoice, right, at a discount for 3 or 4%.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
There's another one called Quill, QWIL, which is actually pretty well funded. I mean, they've got Series C, I think, like 100 million.
Wow.
So
okay.
Something like that. So it's like in the analog world of things, this is, well, it's evolved from just banks, right? So banks normally would have to extend a line of credit to you.
Yeah.
A factoring line, and then they'll buy your invoice as long as you have the credit to substantiate it. And then they'll have buyback provisions and other things that, cost a lot. It costs a lot of money. And most gig workers or independent contractor freelancers could never get a line, right? They don't have the credit to do it.
And that's where I think with blockchain and DeFi, we can get a little more creative here, right? The most basic thing we can do is tokenize an invoice and then use that as a collateral. And we can have some underwriters who are okay with taking this kind of a risk to start giving out the loans. That's pretty simple. And we can do that today on Lendroid, right? That's something we can do. But what I'm thinking really with the experiments with the artists and everything, actually we started working on something called the payout contracts for the artists. So you know how the artists actually earn royalties on secondary sales, right? So if you look at that, it's kind of a recurring revenue. And once you have a recurring revenue on something, you can then take it into a smart contract. And if you can hold that smart contract ownership as an NFT, right? That NFT can be used as a collateral. And that was the idea we were going for. So imagine a freelancer. We can do two things here. One is he could have a payout contract into which he would get the future payment into, right? And then he can tokenize the whole smart contract where he is going to get the payment. And then we can use that token, the NFT, as the collateral for a loan. That's one thing that's possible. The other thing,
it's really smart.
Yeah, and the other thing is also we can go a little more crazy in terms of the reputation and everything. And I think personal tokens, which are getting a little famous today, we can also consider that. Like, for example, imagine that from an angle of an artist, right? So there's an artist, and he could launch a personal token. So it's more like not invoice buying, but like having some kind of a reputation, but that reputation is backed by his own currency.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, that seems like on the adoption curve of things, it might be a little bit into the future. But it's interesting. So just to give some context to this for our listeners, I think it's important to kind of underpin a little bit of this conversation with the problem. And I think the problem that we're talking about here, and make sure that I get this right, is in the world of lending, as I illustrated earlier, banks are just very difficult to deal with. They're very expensive, and the rules and underwriting guidelines for independent contractors just don't really apply. So in the world of sort of a disintermediation and self-sovereignty, the idea is, well, how do we get liquidity into the hands of freelancers? Because here's really the crux of the problem. The reason why these banks are lending and making a killing, and the reason why what did you call it, Gigland, or what was the company that was it? There was the company that was in your YCombinator cohort, the one that you mentioned earlier.
KickPay.
Yeah, KickPay. So my apologies for butchering that, but
okay.
These exist because the problem is really, when you're an independent contractor, you're a business in the eyes of the company, not an employee, because employees get paid on a different timeline than businesses do, right? So I have to wait 30, 60, 90 days to get paid. So I got a cash flow problem. So I need to pay my rent or pay my employees, right? So I'm waiting on getting this money from my customer, which is really the legitimate designation of these people. And I've got to wait to get that money, and I'm just not getting it on time. And even if my terms are 45 days, they're probably paying me in 65 days, right? Because they're not going to pay me on time. They never do. And or rarely do they. So how do we get liquidity, on-demand liquidity, into the hands of this sort of high frequency, high fluidity future of work, right? Because that's really, gig work, independent contracting. People aren't taking full-time jobs. They've got 3 and 4 companies they're working for. They've got all this different, this variety of things happening. They can't possibly keep track of all this stuff very easily. Yep. And number 2, then, getting, collections and liquidity and all of this stuff is a very difficult process. So it's really about, how do we take this emerging technology and create liquidity? That's really what we're doing. Make sense? Correct. Yeah. So good that I'm glad that I got it right. So let me ask another question then.
Sure.
In terms of, making this happen, what do you think user experience needs to look like in order for this to go mainstream? Because right now, the people using DeFi aren't your next door neighbor.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very niche, and that's correct. Like DeFi, like even if the UI is easy, I don't think understanding what yield farming is going to be easy, right?
Yeah, no.
That's the thing. Like the concept.
Hey, did you get your yam though? Did you get your yam?
I skipped on that.
I did too. It went to 0. I saw. So anyway, the experiments. I skipped that experiment.
So with the whole idea of DeFi, like the good part about what you are bringing onto the table is that this is something that people understand, right? Like and one of the most important things, even before we talk about the user experience, I think is that we should talk about how, like if we want a liquid system in this case, we need to make sure that even if it's a delayed payment or something, there is it can be confirmed that the payment will be made, right? And that will be very helpful for a lender to have that trust, so that he can make sure that he gets back his money. That's all that is important if you take a loan, right?
Yeah, of course.
So how does that? You can talk about a little bit about that too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important part here, because look, it's a marketplace really that's being created on the rails of a decentralized, protocol, and the lenders are monumentally important to this, right? So phase 1 is the centralized lenders, right? I want to talk about crowdsourcing later. So how do we make the system trustable?
Yeah.
Such that can happen.
Because I think one of the angles to look at it is like where the money is flowing from, right? Like if you look at where the money is flowing from, if it's from the companies that want to hire these freelancers, there should be a system where either that there is a promise, say for example, there can be a native staking token or something that the companies have to stake in order to hire a freelancer or something, so that if they don't actually repay in the next 45 days, pay the invoice in the next 45 days or within the term, there should be some slashing condition, right?
So they lose their stake, or they slash their stake, and that goes to the freelancer, and they still owe the money.
Or to the lender, right? Like whoever.
Yeah, it could be.
In a sense, because if the lender is going to take over the contract of paying the freelancer, then the lender could take up the stake, right? So that could be something simple we can start with, because the other route we have to take is the reputation. Like we have to figure out what these companies are.
It's like a DeFi credit score kind of thing. Like how do you how do you quantify the trustability of an independent contractor's invoice? And it might be different for you than for me, right? Like and maybe it's a consumption reputation as well as a quality reputation, and like
very much. And I think even if it's a lender, I think they would prefer, or I see them preferring specific to work with freelancers who work for specific companies, right, which they can trust. So overall, if they could see what the companies are behind the freelancer, it makes it easy for them to start lending out. So from the lending perspective, I feel like the underwriters who could be lenders too, but even if we are speaking about a centralized lender to start with, they would probably start with a few companies they want to get the loans out to, and then maybe we can expand to the other companies. So I feel like that'll be the flow here in terms of scaling.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. How do you the slashing idea is really interesting. I guess do you see the user adoption problems of like things like staking, as an example, require a consumer of services to put up money that they wouldn't otherwise have to put up, right? So like if they're just doing business in the regular world, they don't have to put up a stake, right? What's the incentive for them to use a DeFi system? Why would the lenders want to use a decentralized system?
Lenders would with all the information and speaking to people around, I've had is that lenders are ready to put money into DeFi, right? Like I don't see that as a problem. There is a lot of supply from the lenders. The only thing that is stopping them is the trust in the system itself, because people are always chasing new areas to make money from, and if it's a risk-free way of making money, it'll be at least one of the choices that the lenders will want to take, because today the options will be go to a bank, right, or invest in a share. So it opens up a whole lot of opportunities for the lenders. So I think that would be good. But from the other side, where how do we make the lenders trust the system? That's going to be the harder part, right? And one of the things that we were thinking in these cases, where like adding a party like the underwriter, where the lender maybe like you know how pools work today in the DeFi space, right? Like there's a pool, and it has a specific objective, like it will lend say DAI against S or something, right? So it's a pool where the lenders can just deposit their DAI into it. So we can do something similar too, where the lenders can just deposit DAI into a pool, but the pool then decides which companies or which freelancers working for which companies are okay to be supported through a loan.
So almost like a crowdsourced reputation through the pooling system. Yeah. I think there's got to be some sort of there's got to be some sort of reputational system, or else I think it just doesn't work. I mean, that's what I think, because I mean, you're going to have to bootstrap it, of course, but in the end, you've got to be able to tell the difference between a person who's done 10,000 loans, right, and paid them back, 10,000 invoices as an example, and a new guy. It's kind of like Etsy, where like there's a bunch of Etsy scammers that like put up pictures of other people's stuff, and they create a store, and they like shut these down really quick, but you can tell who they are. eBay's the same way, because they have no ratings, right? Or they have sort of fake looking ratings. And it's like, you can kind of tell if you're paying attention, like, no, I shouldn't buy that from that person. Because they're going to totally scam me. But we've got to have something a little bit more modern, I think, instead of just a rating system like that. I think consumption, transactional volume is important, but I think using the community at some point to like attest to the quality of something, right? Like where it's like, the community reputational system, I think, could be very powerful, because you'd have to have a lot of weight to override that, to scam it. You'd have to have a lot of weight to scam it.
And we can do it as a market-driven practice instead of making it like a credit bureau, right? Like where it's a centralized database and you have reputations for each people. Instead of that, it could just be market-driven, where people can get to choose who they want to support, and that could scale over time. But the thing is that here, the first question before we get into the loan part itself, if a freelancer picks up a loan and he does not repay, right, is the freelancer on the hook, or is the company that was supposed to pay the invoice, right? That's the simplest question.
Yeah, well, I think in the world of de-risking this, and if you look at so here's a really interesting nuance. So in the world of, in the legal world of invoicing, if a company, let's say there was a startup who used a bunch of freelancers and didn't pay their invoices, and they filed for bankruptcy. Okay, so in the bankruptcy court, they're actually going to see that. Now, if they have no money, it's a problem. But like if they're going to reorganize, or if there's some assets, the way that the courts look at freelancer invoices, as they look at it like wages.
Okay.
So there would be, it's a really interesting kind of nuance. Now, that's a really bad situation to be in to begin with. So there's really underwriting on both sides. It would be the service consumer also needs to have some, because, they got Moody's and Bloomberg ratings for this, right? Like, they got Dun and Bradstreet, your Dun score, right? For like your quality as as a business, right?
Yep.
So we'd have to think about that too. And we'd have to think about, it seems like there's more enforceability against the company who the invoice was sent to, because the freelancer is sort of at the mercy of them paying, right? So if they don't pay, is that the freelancer's fault? Well, maybe if they did a crappy job, but if you did something, for example, with like some sort of like an open law contract, and you had some sort of like attestation from both parties that this is a legitimate invoice. So there was a digital signature from both the freelancer and the company that maybe was a part of that NFT.
Yeah.
Right. That would provide a lot of assurances that it's going to get paid. And then if it doesn't get paid, it's still a bona fide asset, meaning the company would be on the hook, I would think, not the freelancer. The freelancer should be able to even sell that asset outright and not have any legal tie to it at all. Maybe there's two different options. Maybe one's a buyback provision and they take the risk, and the other one, and maybe you have to do that until you earn a certain amount of reputation.
Okay. And like the first part where you were talking about the problem of a crappy job by the freelancer, right? So I feel like that can be taken out of the conversation, because maybe these invoices get paid, or the invoices get initiated for being paid only after the job is done or something, right? Like
and after there's some sort of verification that it's
yeah. But the delay is still going to be there even after the job is done. And the freelancers are supposed to get the payment, that there is still going to be a delay, like of 30 days, 60 days.
Oh yeah, right? They'll wait. I mean, if my terms are 60 days, I mean, we've done this game a long time, and like people pay us 75, 80, 90 days.
Oh wow.
Okay. Oh yeah, they wait forever, and then you got to call them and harass them all the time. And
oh wow, okay. So that I think that is where if you when you are talking about open law and stuff like that, I think this can be really made. We can get really creative about this, where we have a smart contract. A smart contract is a contract too, right? And legally speaking, and if there is open law attestation and everything on that specific invoice, one thing that can happen is there is the company, the freelancer, the underwriter, and the lender. So there are 4 people now, right? So the company has to pay the freelancer, but he is going to source liquidity from an underwriter, and the underwriter is being funded by the lender. We are doing this because the lender does not want to go behind the freelancer or the company and take care of the business. So the underwriter can be a pool where the money goes from the lender, just goes into the pool, and the pool just funds the freelancer, right? And if there is an issue, the underwriter could take all these invoices that were not paid by the company, and because they become a business in the middle on the blockchain. They are a layer, but they are on the blockchain. But they get all these tokenized contracts, which they can then go, even if necessary, legally claim payment for those invoices.
They could execute their own collections efforts, right? So if they could essentially just cut the freelancer out and say, you owe us now.
Yeah, exactly. So if we do that, and usually that's how traditional invoice paying also works, because if there is a vendor to Walmart, and Walmart has a net 60, and the vendor is going to take a loan on the invoice, if the invoice is not being paid, the vendor is not going to be questioned. It's going to be Walmart, because the invoice was bought, right? So I think that's exactly what we are doing here also, where I think we are buying the invoices of the freelancer for a face value, right? And so he gets his payment immediately, but the underwriter now can take over the invoices. And because because he accrues that skill of managing these invoices, legally speaking, and arranging for collections if necessary, that could become a very nice layer in the infrastructure over time. And there could be competition, many companies coming in too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how does so we talked about centralized lenders. So phase one would be, even traditional lenders, right? Like banks could even get involved in this, right? Like there's a lot of capital, like you said, out there wanting to lend. The pure democratization of this, however, would be some variation of crowd funding. Now, when you add the underwriter to this, or just, letting anybody, participate in a lending pool, right? But like when you add an underwriter to this, they're sort of the professional eyes, right? Like they're the ones looking at this, deciding on risk and whether or not it makes sense. But would that be the same cadence then for just any old person who wants to lend their, what would be Ethereum or DAI into a pool, and then it could turn into USD later, but like it essentially anybody could participate in this? Would you think?
I think that kind of an experiment, again, is very interesting, because now when I speak about the underwriter here, this is not the same underwriter that we see in the traditional world, right? Anyone in this world who can figure out his own set of tools to manage this risk properly, he is going to do well over time. So lenders here are betting on the underwriter to work properly, but they have an option to go to a different underwriter. So instead of having one pool, which is underwriting all the loans of freelancers, that could be 3-4 people who are competing for this. And that way, the lenders can just find the best historical track record of an underwriter instead of understanding what the freelancer is doing and the company is doing. Because those things can be one-off also, right? And that's a lot of information for a lender to process in order to make a loan. So I feel like having a kind of introducing an additional player here will be very good for the game we are trying to create here.
Yeah, it seems like it. Now, how does this underwriter? I guess the underwriter has incentives to do a good job and create good returns and to have trustability, because then they're going to have their own reputation.
Exactly.
So almost like a hedge fund manager, but just in a DeFi sense, right? Like, so somebody who's demonstrating returns. All right. Now,
the simplest would be like, the simplest thing would be where the lenders or the investors in the underwriter pool here just put in, say, DAI or something, right? And the pool can return them pool tokens. So it could be, say, just called ABC. So they get ABC tokens back. And if the pool performs well, the ABC tokens would be worth more. If it does not, they're going to lose money. And the lenders have to understand that they are taking that risk. And that's how they're getting into the lending space here.
That's interesting.
But I find it interesting.
Well, try this on then for a second. What if let's say I'm a part of the Opolis Employment Commons. Okay, so I'm a member, and I'm paying myself consistently. Let's say $100K a year, and that's my base salary that my corporation's paying me, right? So I'm self-sovereignly employed. But then I decide that I want to take 20% of my wages, and I actually want to invest it in an underwriting pool.
Okay.
So, a lot of people think about 401ks and IRAs and all this kind of stuff, but DeFi really does unlock the potential to have these things at your fingertips, right? So like in my dashboard at Opolis, how do you think that would go down? Do you think that there's demand for that? You said that there's no problem with supply, but what's your sense on individuals wanting to participate in a product like this?
I think people are in that mind space right now where they will go for any experiment, right? Like, it's okay in the sense that people understand that there's a innate risk here, and it's not the mainstream people who are directly participating.
Yeah, this is early adopters. This is like
early adopters, right?
And they
understand that it's really that's the interesting part. We don't get these time frames for a very long time. Like usually, that window is very short because someone is going to get really hurt and they're going to call the police, right? Like that's going to happen. And then all these experiments have to stop. But then until that's happening, I think there are a lot of things we can do things like this which would be completely new from how things have been done in the traditional space. Because what we are trying to attack here by talking about the cost and everything of a loan is that we are trying to democratize who can run an underwriter pool, right?
Yeah.
So instead of it being just the banks, we can allow a talent like it is bringing the quants outside of the hedge fund, quants outside of the investment banks, and asking them to sit and make their own pools where they can manage and they could be really good at it. Imagine tomorrow there could be a guy on Twitter who's a quant. He's really good at it, and he runs a DeFi pool, right? And that kind of a future need not be too far from here, and he could have his own token for the pool too.
Yeah, it's really just decentralizing the need for the formal hedge fund, and it's just going directly to the manager people, the quants, as you said, to be able to just do it on their own in a much more high frequency, fluid way. What do you see this? So obviously, there's always a cost to these systems. I mean, how does the freelancer pay for this service to get their money? Are they paying a discount like they would in a normal situation? Is that what they're going to do?
So, like in DeFi, this has been my criticism about DeFi for a while now, where there's only one number called the interest rate, right? And there'll be a 10% or a 12% APR. That does not make sense because you could get a US dollar loan for 2% in the US, right? So the delta there, like the 8% that is going into the funding of a loan, is usually the risk of the whole loan, right? So if we talk about the freelancer and the whole system here, I think it will be a model where it will be a discounted cash flow where if there is a $3,000 invoice, probably he gets say $2,500. I'm not sure. That could be market driven. That's what I'm trying to say. Like that discount. If it's only one person, he will start saying, "Oh, I need $1,000 cut out of that." But if you have more than one person, that would tend to feel like what's the actual risk of the employer not paying the freelancer. That will be the cost of the discount that we would be asking the freelance to take.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the notion of having an open market for this is really important because it seems like if you didn't, you would have a lot of that. You'd have loan sharking, really, is what you'd have.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would be replicating, if not accentuating, a lot of the existing problems.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Really fascinating stuff. So how quickly do you think this is going to be available in well, let me ask this a better way. How quickly do you think we can make this available to people in our Opolis employment commons? Do you think we can? I mean, we've been talking about this for a while. So do you think this is something that we could put out this year? Do you think this is something that we could talk about for early next year, or do you think that the market needs to mature for another year, or what do you think?
From the perspective, like how we are running experiments inside Lendroid, is that we are trying to push, at Lendroid, we are really trying to create a DeFi protocol and not a centralized company, right? Like we are also trying to build all these parts together so that the protocol will be completely decentralized and not require someone to intervene. So from that angle, if the protocol to support something like this, I think it will be next year, say Q2, right?
Yeah.
Protocol fully supporting this, and it's just a natural flow, something like that. But I think we can start experimenting like this year, because even with the NFT space and the artists we were working with, we are already doing these things. We are already doing paired contracts. We are giving them NFTs, right? Like there are now artists who are making their, like, there are people who are renting out their metaverse parcels and to a billboard company, right? And the billboard company is giving it out to an advertiser, and all this money is being split. And this is all happening on a smart contract today, right? So it is possible
It's amazing.
to take this contract, right? I would actually send you, like, we're out, I don't want to spoil it, but we're making an ad to rent out a space in the metaverse, right? So we're working with that artist because I thought it was very interesting what we're doing. And because people don't know about it outside the world, I thought an ad will be like, it is blowing my mind. So we could do an experiment like that, where we can take a few freelancers, right? And probably a couple of employers and see how these contracts can go through, like create probably a NFT for them, pass it on, see how they feel about it, right? And then probably do a couple of contracting ourselves just to figure out how the process is, right? And then you get the hang of it. And maybe by the next year, it'll be part of the protocol. So
we would sort of do a pilot test with it. But yeah, so just so you know, we're about ready to like jump into this. So like I know we've been talking about it for some time, but we're ready to do it. So a couple more questions here. What other things do you think are, DeFi right now is, like I said, digital assets. Let's say we get into, things like invoices and payrolls, but like, what about what's next? Do you see things like homes happening in crowdsourcing, like car loans? Do you see things like that? Do you see, or do you just see, renting out your digital billboard in metaverse and where do you think this is going to go?
See, like, this is a very, a question that divides people, right? So,
I know.
I feel like I'm a person who believes that the digital assets that we own are going to be more valuable than the real assets we're going to own, because everything is imaginary anyways, right? So digital assets are going to be really powerful. So from that context, I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of work that's going to go towards digital assets. Like people who, like, for example, I read a stat that said that 2 billion people are indirectly benefiting from the gaming industry today. I had, like, those kind of statistics are kind of already happening, in the sense that there is this economy that's there somewhere. Like the gaming economy is bigger than the Hollywood industry, right? And things like that, where it's already there as pockets. So blockchain is just going to bring all of them together. So if that's going to happen, the money involved in all of these areas, it's going to be huge. So my take on that would be, like, there's going to be a lot of digital assets. And if it's just going to be investment or something, we'll find so many options here. But again, we have to eat. We have to drive somewhere. We have to live somewhere.
Yeah, right? We do.
That's not going to change. That's not going to change. So probably there'll be people who'd want those things also to be tokenized. But the harder part is now, then it's about the jurisdiction and how friendly the government, and how, if they want to do it, right? Because once you get in you're talking about the house, it's in the government's registries. It's not in the blockchain, right? So that becomes a public partnership with the government. So
yeah, you got to get titles and everything. You're going to have to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then but the lending, there's so much regulation around that stuff that, like, it seems like that'd be a pretty hard nut to crack. But I think it, maybe not on the first wave of things, but I think that stuff's gonna, the core infrastructure lending stuff, like homes and cars. I think those things are gonna get crowdsourced and have more of a democratized market around them. But what do you think? What do you think that the key digital assets are going to be then? Do you think it's art? What do you think the digital assets that people are going to want are? I mean, you're talking about digital real estate in a metaverse or in, places like that, like Decentraland, right? Like, do you think those are it? Or what do you think? Or are those just sort of like the early sort of idea gen sort of like things that have popped up, but now the next wave of really cool stuff's going to come? Like, what's that?
I'm sure the next wave of cool stuff is anyways going to come, right? But in a weird way, like all that's happening in the NFT space, and if you look at all these Decentraland and crypto voxels, for example, these worlds are all weirdly low risk, and they are technically not even they're like playing on a Pentium 1 machine, right? Like that's the kind of graphics they might have, everything. But I think they have their own charm. So it's like even if the world has New York and maybe Singapore today, people still go back to Greece and look at the old really, really old buildings, right? So something, that sort of a dynamic might start happening, because we've created this whole digital space for a while now, but now we are putting something visual to it, right? There's that visual extent, and we are able to experience it and be there. Like, we've started conducting meetups in crypto voxels, even for our community. We're going to start doing that, where like there could be 40 people in the same arena in a crypto voxel parcel, right? And we are just hanging out. So that becomes more emotional, and it has this nostalgic feeling already. So I think those assets will be very valuable in the future, even if they are going to look the same forever, right? Like Minecrafted or something. So yeah, I have this feeling that art is interesting. If you have a case for it, and if you want to be a collector, you have to have your own why you're collecting this art, and you are part of that art, right? So that's a lot of responsibility. So if you look at other digital assets, I would say like all these metaverse related stuff that's just coming up, they are really interesting, really interesting.
No, it is interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see how how the economics work in these things, because that's really what this boils down to is really what are the kind of fluid economics of these new emerging metaverses and experiences that we're creating that are in demand, right? And how you create scarcity, and how you create the collectability, and how you create sort of all of those different components are very interesting. It'll be really interesting to see how that pops up. But thank you for sharing all of that. So Vignesh, we're going to take questions from the audience if we have any. So if you remember, those that are watching, Q&A section on the webinar function here on Zoom, go ahead and dump your questions in for Vignesh or for myself or whoever. Feel free to dump those in. While we're seeing if we have any questions, have you been doing any traveling? Have you? Probably not much.
No. This room is on top of my my bedroom is just downstairs. So I just made this room up so that I can have this feeling of coming up to work every day. So yeah, this is where I work, and this is where I lived. I started growing plants, and that's it.
It's kind of funny how we want to compartmentalize ourselves from work and life, right? So like having a special space for work is really important, even though functionally I can do it from my bed even if I wanted to, but I don't really want to, right? It's like a choice that I make, and I don't really want to do that. So any parting words that you've got for us on just thoughts around DeFi or thoughts around Opolis or anything else?
Sure. So for the things I'm talking about here about the artists and all these new areas that are working out, right? I think Opolis, as a pilot project, where I'm sure that you are already onboarding freelancers from the traditional space, but I think it'll be very interesting to onboard some of these companies. For example, Lendroid. Lendroid pays freelancers already, right? So we are a company, we are playing freelancers. It'll be interesting through Opolis. So that, even when it comes to lending and underwriting a loan, we would probably trust another company in the crypto space more than something outside now, and it will be a good experiment, right? So maybe we can rope in a few companies that are already paying their freelancers and are in the crypto space. And once we can get started like underwriting those loans, I think it will be a very interesting starting point to get the experiment done.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we've been talking with a few companies about doing that, and so I think the plan is to sort of educate these companies on how to organize themselves in a compliant way, that allows them to consume services from self-sovereign workers, right? So instead of the knee-jerk being, well, I'm just going to, make you my employee, or I'm just going to 1099 you and not deal with it. Like, what's the better way? What's the more professionalized way to both protect the best interest of the individual, but also make it much more fluid for the companies who are consuming these services to access this talent on demand, right? And to make it much more high frequency and much easier to deal with.
Yeah.
So I think we're talking the same thing, but yeah, it's, when we talk to companies, a lot of companies are very knee-jerk around, well, there are employees.
Yeah.
On the one hand. On the other hand, they're like, well, we're just 1099ing them. But then like compliance comes in and it's like, well, should they be employees? Should they?
Yeah.
And there's all this, but Opolis basically solves that problem. So like, yeah, we can certainly unpack that too.
Sure.
Would love to do it. So we do have a question here from Joshua Trimmel. Wants your opinion or our opinion on who are the top players in DeFi to follow. So if there's going to be projects to follow, aside from Opolis and Lendroid, who else should they be following?
I find Alex Masmej, right? Like you know him, right? Like he launched his own personal token, Alex, and he's doing some interesting stuff in the space. And he was at Denver too. That is where his conversation started. So I found him very interesting. I'm sure that he's going to do something very interesting. He's not started working on his own company yet, but I think he's a very interesting person to follow. His name is Alex, and his last name is Masmej. So he's one interesting dude. I actually invested some money in his personal token.
No, he was working with, isn't he with Orchid? Who is he with?
Sure. No.
I don't remember. No, different guy. Yeah.
They were all part of the Metacartel, right? So
yeah.
I think Metacartel is a great place to start if you want to follow the space right now, because a lot of these companies actually come out of the clan, which is Metacartel, and there are like these young individuals who are doing a lot of experiments as we are seeing today, and all these companies are coming out of that cohort. So I find it interesting. But again, one thing that's really hard, as the question points out, is it's hard to find out how do I trust the project or not. So I would really be like, okay, you have to do your own research. Whatever happens, I think that's the disclaimer in everything, right? Like right now in DeFi.
Yeah, you've got to be your own fact checker. I mean, there's a lot of inherent risk, and I think that's the thing that people have to be willing to tolerate is 100% total catastrophic loss. It could there could be another hack over a weekend, and you could lose everything. I mean, it could be easy as that. Anybody else come to mind? So Metacartel is a great one. I mean, the guys that are a part of the Metacartel. I mean, the whole sort of amorphous entity that is, is it got a lot of bright minds in that. So for sure.
I feel like that's the European side of the Ethereum community, right? Like they have a different vibe to them, and I find them really interesting too. And there are also aggregators like I like OneInch, which is they are interesting relayers. They came out with the Chi token, which is a gas token basically. So they do a good job. These are all edge DeFi players and not the core protocols itself. So I find these infrastructure companies more long lasting actually.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Are there any words of caution or specific things to avoid that you would suggest to our listeners? Like, is there anything in particular about DeFi right now that's sort of overly concerning you?
There is going to be this whole area of these, because now we've unlocked this idea of an experiment, right? Like where you can tweet and say that we didn't deploy the code. So that's going to happen. And we are going to have a bunch of tokens now. And if there's going to be a ride, like a bull ride on Ethereum or something, there'll be hundreds of these tokens which might not really make sense. There could be clones and everything. So it is important to, like, so for example, these communities are usually on Discord or probably Telegram or somewhere. I think it's very important to be part of the community if you want to put money into something, and not just take a look at how they say, like an aggregator and be like, okay, I'm going to diversify my investment kind of a thing. Like it's nice to be part of communities instead of actually like just putting your money in 10 places. So that's one of the things I have, because even if you lose some money, you will be like, you'll go up and down with the community, and that's a better ride in this industry compared to like just taking a bet in the dark, and all the 10 projects could fail too. So that's the word of caution.
Yeah. So certainly don't put all of your money into DeFi experiments. I think that would be a bad strategy. But in any case, well, thank you, Vignesh, for your time and your wisdom and your insights and your just enthusiasm for the space. It's always a super fun time to have conversation and to just get together and see what's new. So we're definitely, once this pandemic craziness is over, we're going to have to plan a reunion somewhere. And we're going to have to make sure that a bottle of tequila is involved, because that was a pretty good time. We didn't do anything illicit. It was just a good time and good tequila and good friends. So we appreciate you. I just wanted to say hello to Anand, who is on with us from your team, and he's been kind of listening in. And just thank you for your support, and we look forward to building some cool things here in the near future. So thank you for everyone for joining this episode of Opolis Public Radio. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos just like this, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast if you prefer just the audio version. If you're a freelancer, gig worker, independent contractor, solopreneur, looking for an employment solution to become self-sovereign and a self-sovereign worker, make sure you join the Opolis Employment Commons today at opolis.co. That's opolis.co. And until then, we'll see everybody next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.